strafe down, they give you full analog control, and you're still free to look around with the mouse. Again, where you can reuse the trigger. You guys are not the same bind, just as an example. So that index hat there, that's what controls the targeting mode of the gimbal. Cycles through. So go auto, the target mode, and overhead lever, we can control exterior. Same kind of shared controls. For ground vehicles, I'm using the left stick to steer, and using the pedals for acceleration and brake. I reduce the amount of thrust output by squeezing it. In a gravitational field, the ship will slowly start to descend. It's a really easy way to get a nice, smooth descent. Alright, this is going to be a little bit of an unusual stream / video, but it's sort of a request, and now that 3.12 is out, it's a good idea to look at it. We're going to do all of the keybinds. Every keybind that we can keybind something to, we're going to try to keybind it. So if you've seen the cockpit video, then you'll know that the cockpit was designed to basically eliminate keyboard input whenever we can avoid it. Eliminate mouse input whenever we can avoid it. Go really immersive and try to concentrate everything into joysticks and everything else that the cockpit controls themselves. So we're going to go look through the keybinds and we're going to see what we can do. Now I've already had my keybinds. I've had my keybinds saved for years now in Star Citizen, but I'm just going to go through them all here again, and we'll look at them, and I'll kind of try to describe my thought process behind binding what to where. I think I'm going to rebind a few things too now that we have a few more binds available in 3.12, so we'll go through that process at the same time. I'm not going to cover things that aren't specifically in Star Citizen. So for example, I'm not going to cover the targeting computers keybinds. Targeting computers set up to be able to have binds now, which don't really affect what's in game. They affect what's being displayed on the targeting computer and what's being displayed on the streams. So I'm not going to cover that. I'm also not going to cover this MFD down here, because this MFD is actually used to control communication software outside of Star Citizen. So there's no real need in covering that at the moment. I'm just covering key bindings within Star Citizen. Anyway, we're in the Valkyrie here, and the reason for that is so that we can move around, do a little bit of FPS movement, and then later on we'll probably go in the verse and we'll take a closer look at things. But yeah, we'll get started doing every single possible key binding. Now with my setup, I actually have, I think it's 11 devices that are going to be recognized by Star Citizen. If you have that, then you're not going to have access to inversion settings, because you can only handle that on 4 joysticks within Star Citizen itself. So the way to get around that is to, in the case of the Virpil controllers, is to save any of those inversion settings directly to the controller, or use Joystick Gremlin, which is my favorite program for managing multiple joysticks altogether and rebinding things to other things that we normally can't use. So most of these inversion settings I'm not actually even using within Star Citizen. I'm saving them right to the devices themselves. Game settings. Do we need to look at anything in game settings here? Don't think so. I turned a lot of the look ahead stuff on or off because we're going to be using head tracking. So I don't really like look ahead when I already have head tracking. If I want to look ahead, I can manually look ahead. Yeah. Alright. So, key bindings. Let's go through every category. See if there's anything new that can be bound. Okay, so eject. So eject for me is actually this eject lever down here in front of the stick. So pulling that causes you to eject in a vehicle that has an ejection seat. So leave vehicle seat. So above me, I have a bunch of controls. So one of the controls is up here. Push that, exit the seat. Actually have a keyed switch and a toggle switch that has to be activated simultaneously in order to activate self-destruct. So you have to arm the self-destruct system by turning the key and then using the toggle switch to activate self-destruct. Emergency exit seat. Not even quite sure what behavior that has, but I believe it's just a faster exit the seat. We'll come back to that one. Increase cooler rate. Some of these I hardly ever use. It's gonna be this on the MFD here. So this two-way switch right here. Increase cooler rate, decrease cooler rate. Flight system's ready. That's an overhead switch. Open and close all doors. So I actually have a lever that's similar to the eject lever that's spring-loaded up top. So for that, you pull the lever and it activates it. And it's kind of similar for lock-unlock doors. There's another overhead switch. There we go. So that locks and locks all doors. Now I'm just gonna not bother binding these ones because they're just toggle. This one toggles back and forth, this one toggles back and forth between that. So you could use these if you wanted to have separate buttons for lock and unlock for each of those. And I don't think I'm gonna bind emergency exit seat. At least not for now. Alright, so that's flight cockpit. Flight view. So for look left and right, even though we have head tracking, I've actually got this bound to the mini stick on the Alpha. And same thing for look up and down. And cycle camera view is pushing in the button under this mini stick on the Alpha. Zoom in and zoom out. That's the X-axis on the mini stick on the Delta. Look behind is the pinky button on the Alpha. So is there anything here we want to bind as well? No, I don't think so. So just going back out for a moment. So what binding that to the stick does is it gives you analog camera control on the stick here. And then pushing the stick in changes from first person to third person. So it's a nice little feature. Without free look on, even if you're moving it within the cockpit itself, it won't move your view too far either. But that's why I bind that way. All right, let's go back into key bindings. Flight view. So we got all the view ones we want. All right, flight movement. So pitch is y-axis. Yaw, we're gonna use pedals. Some people prefer to use X-axis on stick for yaw and space sims, but I prefer using pedals for yaw. It's just personal preference. If you're using pedals for yaw, you're going to want some pretty accurate, sensitive pedals, and you're probably going to want to go in and eliminate their dead zone entirely within the pedals themselves. You want every little minute movement to be tracked, at least in my opinion. So that makes roll is on X-axis. Alright, so swap yaw and roll. I don't want to do that at all because I want everything to just remain consistent. Strafe up and down. So with my setup, I have my modified constellation delta. Puts it at an angle so that the twist axis is oriented up and down. So we're going to use the twist axis on the delta to use strafe up and down. That gives us analog control over strafe up and down. Strafe left and right. Again, this is on the left stick. Throttle forward and back. That's on the y-axis. Decoupled mode is... What do I actually have decoupled mode set to? There we go. So it's the right hat right on the delta. So afterburner, that's the first stage trigger on the delta. Speed limiter, this is speed limiter relative, and for that it's the y-axis on the delta. So moving the mini stick up and down is controlling the speed limiter. Speed limiter on off, hold or hold slash toggle. So what this key binding does is it removes the speed limiter entirely. It remembers where you last had it set, so when you use it, it'll allow you to go up to maximum speed, and when you tap it again, it'll limit your speed back to the last spot that you had limited it to. So that's really, really handy when you need bursts of speed. And for that, I bind it to the second stage of the trigger on the left stick, and that way I can squeeze through quickly past the first stage of the trigger to release the speed limiter. And if I want to use afterburner at the same time, I can squeeze the first stage of the trigger for afterburner, squeeze through to stage 2 of the trigger to release the speed limiter, and then back off to stage 1 to hold afterburner. Or I can just squeeze through both stages real quick, and it'll just release the speed limiter without holding on afterburner. So let's back out, and I'll show you what I mean here. So our velocity is on the left-hand side of the HUD, and if I move the mini stick up and down, that's controlling where the speed limiter is set to. That affects how much of the axis is being used on the stick. So for example, if I set it to SCM speed and I push forward, that means 100% forward on the y-axis on the delta is being used for that SCM speed. So if I pull the stick back, that means that about 50% or wherever I am holding the stick at is being used for the SCM speed, up to that maximum that I have the speed limiter. But if I increase the speed limiter and I don't change how far forward I'm pushing on the stick, then I go faster because it's using that proportional amount on the axis to determine the speed. So if I wanna quickly disengage that speed limiter, then I can push through to stage 2 of the trigger, and I can have afterburner on or off the whole time, and then if I push it again, it re-engages the speed limiter at the last setting that it had, and we're now limited at that speed. I find it's a really, really convenient way to keep that set up. Alright, let's go back into key bindings again. Speed limiter reset to SCM. We could bind something to that. Yeah, I think I'll bind left hat down to reset to SCM. Alright, acceleration limiter. So for this one, I'm using the absolute binding. And we're going to put it on the analog brake lever on the alpha. And what the acceleration limiter does, it limits the amount of available thrust. So you can see on the HUD that as I squeeze the lever, the maximum amount of thrust output is reduced. So the lever not being squeezed at all means you can achieve 100% or beyond that into afterburner levels of thrust. But if I squeeze it, it will limit the thrust output, and it limits it in all directions for all thrusters. So here I'm holding about 50% maximum acceleration, so it's limiting the amount of thrust. If I release that lever, I get 100% thrust, so the ship's actually more responsive. And you might be wondering, why would you want to limit acceleration? Because sometimes you want to not have sudden movements, especially when you're trying to land, or make a little bit more precise maneuvers. And another great thing about limiting thrust is when you're hovering over something or when you're coming in for a landing, you can squeeze that lever in a gravitational field, and your ship will slowly sink to the ground because you're no longer outputting enough thrust to keep you hovering. So it's a really nice way of just easily descending to the ground by slowly limiting the maximum amount of thrust. Whereas the speed limiter limits your speed, the acceleration limiter actually limits the amount of thrust. So you can set the speed limiter to 0, but you're still going to be hovering there because you're just sitting there at 0, which is what the speed limiter is set to. But the acceleration limiter is what actually allows you to limit the thrust output. Alright, let's go back into key bindings again. Match target velocity. I don't think that one's worked in a very long time. You can press. You'll do left hat. We'll do left hat up for that one. Space brake is an analog axis, but I'm not actually going to bind it. The reason I'm not going to bind it is because normally you use space brake to get control back to your ship if you don't know what direction that you're thrusting in. But if you have full analog control, I don't really think it's really maybe necessary. Actually, let's actually just bind it to left hat right, just in case. lock pitch slash yaw movement. I'm not sure why you'd want to do that. For G-Safe, I actually have a switch, which you're not able to see. It's a little bit behind me. Same for ESP. Cruise control. It's right hat, left. Landing system. So my landing system is actually tied into the SimPit itself. And anytime it's activated, it changes the lighting. But it actually has a way of syncing back up. VTOL. So that's left hat left. Auto land. What did I set to auto land? Oh, left hat, or sorry, right hat down. Don't really use auto land, but we'll just leave it bound. Quantum system. Toggle that on. That's button 12, which is the right hat pushed in, and activating quantum drive is button 8, which is the right hat pushed up. I used to have it bound separately over here to this device here, but because of the changes over the years, you quantum travel a lot more to get around planets even, so it's a little bit more convenient to keep it on here, I find. Especially if you want to use it to get away in a hurry. Alright, let's look at targeting. This is probably where I'm going to make a few changes. Pin selected target, so that is the upper right hat pushed in. Same for the unpinned selected target. Lock selected target. So for locking the selected target, it's the first stage of the wheel on the alpha. And then unlocked lock target is the second stage of the wheel. So this wheel on the alpha is like your mouse wheel, but it has two stages to it. It has a stage 1 where you push it in, just sort of like a 2-stage trigger, and you can push beyond that first stage to the second stage. So that allows you to lock a target, and then if you don't want that target, you can push in further to unlock. Switch flight lead slash lag reticle. I like to be able to switch the targeting pip type depending on the ship and conditions and other things like that. I find that lead pip is better for attacking at a distance, but lag pip is better for attacking closer targets because you can more accurately see what the target is doing. With lead pip, you're tracking the pip. With lag pip, you're tracking the target more with your eyes, so you can sort of more anticipate what they're doing with the lag pip versus lead. Lag's also a lot better for targeting specific spots on ships, because you're putting that lag pip over the target, whereas the lead pip is sort of just hitting the center of mass. So in order to be able to accommodate changing, it's the index hat that I have on the alpha pushed in that changes that type. So it's sort of like reaching up here and pushing that in. Might have to go back to that since they got target cycling split up. Alright, so cycle selection. So just like we have lock selected and unlock selected targets on the wheel, for the target cycling, I've got one direction of the mouse wheel and the other direction of the wheel on the alpha. So that allows you to select through the different targets that come up. Pinned back target is the upper left hat. Pin forward, upper left hat again. Cycle lock in view under reticle. You could bind that, but I find that lock selected target and unlock selected target combined with these target selections, and the fact that if you don't have anything locked, it's going to basically focus to whatever is under your reticle anyway. I find that I don't really need to have that bound because of the dual stage of the wheel. If you want to unlock and lock onto a new target real quickly, it's just you just push through to the second stage and then push the first stage again. So it's a really quick method of being able to target, because you don't even have to move your thumb off the same button. So I find I don't really use that. Cycle lock attackers. So for that one, I've got on the left hat down for that. If I just want to cycle quickly through all hostiles, then it's left and right on that hat. Actually, it might be a good idea to set that to reset to closest. So we'll set hostile set to closest. We'll make that up on that left hat. So one thing that you can do with the Virtual software is add additional buttons to axes. So I've actually set the analog stick at its limits to be additional buttons. So for friendlies, left, right, and actually let's make that consistent. Let's make closest up every time. Sub-targets. Let's use right hat up and down for that. And to reset to main target, we'll do the left hat pushed in. We won't bind any of the alls because I don't think there's any point in cycling through everything when we have hostiles, attackers, and everything like that set up. So I'm keeping all the targeting controls right on the head of the stick, basically, just for easy reach. And we'll jump back into that a little bit after. Hail target could be quite useful for quickly establishing a comms call to them. I think we'll come back to that one though. Alright, so for scanning, it's going to be the thumb hat down to toggle to scanning mode. The reason I'm keeping that one on the stick is because you want quick access to that sometimes. That allows you to maneuver and change direction while entering scanning mode. So activating scanning, that's going to be the first stage of the trigger. And we can use this trigger here for scanning and weapons because you can't fire weapons while in scanning mode. So we might as well double up on that binding. For the ping, that's going to be stage 2 of the trigger. And since you can't target things while in scanning mode, we can reuse a couple of the left hat keybinds for that function as well. So whenever you can reuse keybinds when you're in different modes that would have no effect otherwise. I don't actually have a dedicated mining mode keybind because I don't really mine that much, but let's set mining mode for the overhead 4-way hat lever. Fire mining laser, you can't fire weapons in mining mode, so we're going to reuse the first and second stage of the trigger. So fire the mining laser, stage 1, switch the mining laser mode from the laser to the collection mode. We'll use stage 2 of the trigger. Increase mining laser power. So we're going to use the scroll wheel on the left stick for that. Same for decrease. And then we can decrease laser power using the mini stick analog axis. We should probably set these binds here as well. I'm not going to be using missiles while in mining mode, so let's reuse some of the buttons on the head of the stick as well, just to kind of keep the same feeling. So I'm just going to rotate through those. So we'll use the red button on the alpha to push in on the upper right hat and the black button on the alpha for that. Jettison cargo, it's probably not important to keep that one right on the stick. I think we're going to set that to, let's set that to the maglock servo on the actual cockpit itself. Nice great big button that we could push in if we really want to get rid of that cargo. Turrets. I've got some basic keybinds set up for this, but let's actually go in and really set some binds up. So pitch, we've got set to Y on the alpha. Yaw, we've got pedals. That's just to keep it consistent with flight controls. Let's see here. So change the cycle to fire mode. Let's set that to what normally is now let's change the fire mode to, we're not going to use countermeasures on here, so let's change this to fire mode to the CMS switch. Yeah, we'll do CMS switch there. We will do gyro mode, we'll do left on the CMS switch, so fire mode will be right on the CMS switch, stabilization will be left. I'm not going to bind any of the speed limiters on the turret because we have full analog control over that, so we can control that with analog. I don't think we need to control anything with speed. If we're going too fast, we can just limit our input. And all of our targeting keybinds that we've set on the alpha will still work for the turret. So we don't have to worry about those. That keeps everything consistent. I actually find analog turrets a lot easier to use than using mouse ever since they did the changes. Certainly a lot of fun. So yeah, we won't bind any of those speed limiters. I suppose we could bind recenter. Yeah, well, I'll rebind that to the pinky button, since that would be unused. Normally the pinky button's used for look behind, but you're not going to be looking behind in a turret. Not going to use this one either, this toggle turret mouse movement. That changes the style of aiming for the turret, but you're not using it in a turret anyway, so if you're using analog, so I'm not gonna bother binding it. We could bind ESP on and off, but I don't really know why you'd want to turn it off if you're using a full analog setup. But if you wanted to have it off, then you could bind that to something, but I'm not going to bind it. Weapons. So weapon group 1 and 2. And depending on your ship, depending on your ship that you normally fly, you might want to bind weapon group 1 to stage 1 of the trigger, or stage 2, and vice versa for stage 2. Weapon group 1 I actually have bound to the second stage, and weapon group 2 I have bound to the first stage, just because most of the ships I'm usually in, the default firing groups, it usually just works out that way a little bit better. I don't use gimbals, so I'm not going to really worry about binding anything here. That said, cycle gimbal, assist standard gimbal, and gimbal lock modes. That's done by pushing forward on the index hat on the alpha. So for missiles, cycle missile type forward is the black button on the alpha. Acquiring the missile lock is red, and launching the missile is also red. I don't see any reason to unlock a missile if you're locking it. You can change target if you really have to. But if you're locking a missile, generally you're intending to fire it, so. Decoys. So it's the CMS or the thumb switch on the alpha to the right. Increasing the burst size. You don't need to worry about default burst size that much, but I do want to have a quick way of configuring it. So let's handle through the MFD for increase and decrease. Panic launch is where it dumps, I think it's 50% of your remaining levels of decoy countermeasures. So that's the CMS switch forward. Noise field, that's the CMS switch left. Again, again, see, like when I do this, it's telling me there's already in use, but it's a turret gyro stabilization. If you're in a turret, you're not going to be launching countermeasures anyway, so you can double up on those bindings. Shield levels. So this is the center hat on the Delta. So front is up, back is back, left, right. Top I have set the same as forward and back. And resetting shield levels to default is that pushing that same hat in. So that gives you some quick shield management right over here. That way you're not reaching for it when you need to change that. Power. So I actually got, similar to the way I got flight ready mounted above, I got power toggles up above. And I also have individual toggles for the power systems on the left here. So for the three main power groups, we have the thrusters or engines. Oops, grabbing the wrong one. Don't use them very often, but they're there. So toggle thrusters, shields, weapons. So that allows you to shut off those individual systems, groups. So increase priority. This is the power triangle that's in the MFD, but you can bind it to buttons instead. So again, I don't use that very often because there's not much of a point currently, but increase priority for weapons, increase priority for shields, increase priority for thrusters, that's all in the MFD. Again, it's not something that you use often, but it's nice to have dedicated spot for a keybind for them. Reset priority to default, that's also in the MFD. So decrease throttle, increase throttle, decrease throttle to min, decrease throttle to max. This isn't the throttle that's you know, for moving your ship. This is the power throttle, so it's limiting the power output of your power plant and all your components. So you can manually set it on the MFD, but it's also nice to be able to just be able to set it with an actual physical button. So decrease throttle, increase throttle, decrease throttle to min, increase throttle to max. So it's nice having a few little keybinds there just to be able to do that in a hurry. Honestly, these are keybinds I haven't looked at it in a while. The PIDB, that's a toggle over there. What did I set radar cycle range to? I don't know what I set that to originally. Well, let's set it for that for now, since that doesn't seem to get used a whole lot. Flight HUD cycle pitch slider mode. I'm gonna have to look at that one. I'm not sure what that one does. Scoreboard. I think at one point I had that set to the MFD. We could set map to button down here too. Well, I might as well set this one as well. We're here. Just gonna set that to the bottom row of the MFD. Set pitch ladder mode too. I'm not sure what pitch ladder mode does, but maybe we'll find out. Lights. So one good part about my setup is having full analog control of on foot and EVA movement as well. So for the kind of got the same idea here. So move left and right. That's the mini stick. Again, we're gonna get duplicate keybinds here because we can use them over a whole set of different things. Same for movement forward and backwards. So for jumping on foot, I handle that with the second stage of the trigger on the left stick. For crouch, it's pushing in the mini stick. You know, standard, what you'd see on controllers. For prone, it's left hat down. Sprint is first stage of the trigger. You notice that kind of parallels with having afterburner on that control as well. We don't need walk because, well, we have full analog control over our movement, and if we're not sprinting, well, then by default we're walking, so. Just like how I manually set up additional buttons for the edge of the axis on the mini stick for the Alpha, I also set up, using the Virpil software, additional buttons for the ends of the axis left and right on the Delta. So if I want to lean left, then I can lean left by holding the whole stick left. If I want to lean right, then I can lean right by holding the whole stick to the right. So a lot of these ones here, like firearm attack, melee attack, blocking, and all this other stuff, I don't need to bind it here because it's actually going to be bound to the mouse, because we're still using the mouse to aim and shoot and all that other stuff. And I've also got this particular mouse is G600, and it has 12 buttons on the side, plus it has an additional third button for your ring finger. And I'll explain how I have that set up in a little bit. But we don't need to bind all this stuff to things on joysticks at all. Sort of the same thing with like select sidearm, primary weapon, secondary weapon, gadgets, and things like that. They're all handled by buttons on the mouse itself. So reloading, I actually have that the scroll wheel push in. For these holsters and drops and inspects and all this stuff, so for holster, it's pushing in the right hat. So dropping item is down on the right hat. That kind of makes sense. You're dropping it to the ground. Inspecting the item is to the right. Don't have anything bound to customize. I don't find you have to customize too much, but again, you could bind something on one of these if you had to. Hold breath. So we're going to actually reuse the stage 1 of the trigger, because when you're going ADS, you're not going to be able to sprint. So we can reuse that bind there. So we can just lightly squeeze that trigger, And that gives us the whole breath function. Change fire mode, that's up on that hat there. Probably need to bind these weapon zeroing things now too. So probably going to change the keybinds just a little bit. FPS underbarrel attachment action. Let's make that... We might bind that with a button on the mouse after, but I'm just going to make that the right hat left for the moment. Key bindings are sort of an ever-evolving thing as you continually find new ways of being more efficient. So weapon zeroing, let's use... Actually, what is... I don't even know what the key bindings are by default. Let's switch over to keyboard and mouse and see what they are. Page down and page up. Yeah, we're not going to be reaching for keyboard to do that, so... Just going to have to reconfigure a little bit of key bindings here. So weapon zeroing decrease, let's put that to the center hat down. We'll do center hat up for increase. Default movement speed increase and decrease. Well, we're not using that because we're using full analog movement. Flashlight, we'll use the center hat, push in. Heal is left hat right. Refill oxygen is left hat left. Helmet. It's nice to have that on something. What can we bind it to? Oh, let's bind helmet to the overhead hat switch. Then it's like we're taking off our helmet. If we need to take off our helmet in some situation, we probably don't need to be moving at the same time, so we'll do that. Let's do the same thing for the wiping the helmet visor. Let's make that the overhead joystick hat to the right. So then it's like we're wiping our face. There we go, we can use that. It's just sometimes nice to be able to quickly go into, just use that center hat. Sometimes nice just to be able to go into third person view quickly. Yeah, we don't need this, we don't need that, don't need map. These right here roll left and right. They're actually bound to do an axis, but they don't work properly. They're actually tied to the lean left and lean right binds that we did here. And as a reminder, those are actually set up as additional buttons at the end of the axis on the left stick. So tractor beam, increase distance and decrease distance. So that's for the new tractor beam tool. Let's just take a look at what the keyboard command is for that by default. Mouse wheel up and down. Yeah, that's what I thought it was going to be. So we don't need to change that because we have access to a mouse. Alright, EVA. So EVA actually shares a lot of controls with odd foot, so we don't have to really worry about a lot of stuff there. For rolling an EVA, I'm going to use the same thing as lean. Since it's a roll, and EVA is basically you're just leaning left and right, except that you don't have a limit to how far you can lean left and right. For strafing up and down, we'll do analog. We'll do the same thing that we do for ships, where we rotate the stick up and down to go up and down. Strafing left and right, we'll keep it the same as FPS, so we'll left and right on the mini analog stick. Same for strafe forward and backwards. That'll be the Y-axis on the mini stick, forward and back. Brake, I'll do the button underneath the trigger on the Delta. And for boost, I will do the stage 1 of the trigger. Not going to bind free look because we have head tracking if we really need it, and we have a mouse. We can look around. So I do see some people are watching the stream. I don't see any activity in chat. Feel free to type any questions in chat. I'm happy to answer them. Or if you have any ideas or suggestions or anything like that. So ground vehicles, they inherit a lot of the other controls, so we don't actually need to bind this here. Let's unbind horn. Let's unbind that. Yeah, like all these other vehicle controls here, we don't need to bind them because they're all taken care of elsewhere. I think they would override the other bindings if you had them set up, but there's no point. Just for fun, we can bind the overhead ground vehicle movement. So what I've done for my pedals on the toe brakes is using the MFG configurator tool. I've combined the toe brakes into a single axis, and that gives me forward on the right pedal and backwards on the left pedal. A Hamlock says, that's an interesting controller. Yes, it is. Thank you. So for yawing left and right, I'm trying to approximate a steering wheel. So I'm just going to use the X-axis on the left stick. If you're in a country where you drive on the other side of the road and your steering wheel is on the other side of a vehicle usually, then maybe you'd want it to bind it to your right stick to kind of give that more driving feeling, or maybe you have a steering wheel in your setup, I don't know, but that's just what I do. Pitch up, pitch down. Since we're going to control on there, let's use it over here on Y. Don't think we need brake with the analog input bound. Boost, again, everything that's boost, afterburner, anything like that, keep that all consistent. Make that stage 1 of the trigger. You're setting up the world's coolest control system. I'm stuck in some random cave trying to fur into first because I didn't watch a beginner's guide. Finding those guys in caves is not the easiest thing sometimes. Oh, electronic access spectator. I'm not even going to bother setting this up. There's not really much of a point. What I find those cave missions are best for is to go mining, not really to find the guys in the caves. There's nothing to bind under social invites under joysticks. Social emotes. Not going to bind emotes to anything on the controller. We can access that through the personal or thought wheel anyway. Okay, so head tracking. The way I have head tracking set up is head tracking's only on when the flip trigger on the alpha is in the ready position. And squeezing it up against the first stage of the trigger also disables it. And if you want to know exactly how I'm doing that, I got a video on YouTube about that. The reason why I do that is so that when you are shooting at something, then you're not moving your head around and having to track your reticle at the same time you're tracking the target or the pip. It keeps everything nice and centered by having head tracking reset to center when it's turned off. Again, that's something that you can figure up in the head tracking over here. I'm not using FOIP, so we don't have to worry about that. Don't have anything set up there. Again, these all here, I'm not going to use these on any kind of joystick binding. And I'm not going to bind anything to advanced camera controls. So, just go back to the head tracking here for a second. Head tracking toggle has to be enabled, it has to be off. And you gotta use auto recalibrate. Alright, so for scanning, again, where you can reuse the trigger, because they're not the same bind, just as an example. Again, we can get out of our seat. Or can we, in Arena Commander? Forget. No, we can. And again, we can walk around with full analog movement. There's the prone. There's the roll that we talked about. And here's going into EVA. So again, left and right, analog control, strafe up, strafe down, they give you full analog control, and you're still free to look around with the mouse. So that index hat there, that's what controls the targeting mode of the gimbal. Cycles through. So go auto, to the target mode, to gimbal locked. And overhead lever, we can control exterior. Well, you can't see the overhead lever, but there it is, it's working. And as we squeeze through So the flip trigger is in deployed position now. So that means the head tracking's on. If we flip the flip trigger back up, that disables our head tracking. If we flip it back down, it's back on, and if we squeeze through it to bump up against the first stage of the trigger, then it holds everything centered for being able to shoot steady. Okay, so that's basically all of the bindings. Alright, so again we'll go overhead. Power on, flight ready. We can hit the landing gear lever and retract the gear.
Landing gear raised.
And the lights change down here to match. So what I was talking about earlier with the controls about the acceleration limiter, which is the analog brake lever on the Alpha. If I reduce the amount of thrust output by squeezing it in a gravitational field, the ship will slowly start to descend. It's a really easy way to get a nice, smooth descent.
Landing complete.
And landing.
Terminal land systems. System check.
So again, same kind of shared controls. For ground vehicles, I'm using the left stick to steer. I'm using the pedals for acceleration and brake. We can use that acceleration limiter trick over the pad as well.
Landing complete.
Alright guys, I am going to put this down for now, and we'll probably be doing a group stream later on tonight.